preferred level of intellectual activity, if that changed. We need to look into that. The person actually who was on standard American diet was the one who reported that switching to veganism improved their experience with school and education. It was biochemistry that got affected. This video is a part of the Ex-Vegan Study Report series, and if you haven't seen part 1 of the series, then please use the QR code or the link in the description to proceed and watch it, because there you will find the study overview, methodology, and several important parameters that we've already looked into, the parameters that were associated with vegan experiences of our respondents. And in this video, we will look into the relationship between veganism and schooling, education, and intellectual development of our respondents. And first, let's analyze what goes into receiving an education. What goes into intellectual development? What are the requirements to succeed in those activities? So here I put 2 images. First is some lectorium, some university room, and on the right I put this metaphoric image that corresponds to the intellectual development. I found it among other like stock photos, and this image is unique because it's not a person with super serious face pointing at the screen in their laptop. This is more naturalistic, more, I would say, fundamental image that could correspond to intellectual development. So under the picture with that symbolizes getting education, I put the skill set, some requirements that are imposed on a human when they are trying to receive a certain skill set, and they're trying to get a good education. So what it takes to get good education, to become a professional in something. I put these 4 things here. First, we need an ability to solve many problems under high pressure and do it quickly. The second demand is the ability to work on diverse kinds of tasks. And it also requires an ability to switch between the tasks efficiently. Usually when you're in school, you are working, for example, in one night, you will be working on solving mathematical problems, then you will be solving or like writing some materials on mechanical physics, then you will go to organic chemistry, and then you also, on top of that, you have a report to prepare. So these 2 things are huge. You need to work quickly, solve many problems, diverse problems, and be able to switch between them efficiently just because of the time constraints. You have no luxury to just sit, meditate between different tasks. Then another thing that is required when you are going through the condensed educational program is an ability to physically withstand lack of sleep, stress, and mental overload. Yes, it may not be a daily thing, but it is almost inevitable. Even if you fully optimize your regimen, even if you fully optimize your lifestyle, you still are going to run into this problem that there will be some midterms, there will be some final exams, on top of a bunch of other stuff. Sometimes it just happens. Mental overload also can happen, stress. As much as you may try to again do all sorts of mental tricks, there are unexpected challenges that you may encounter, and they will be stressful. That's just human nature. Anything unexpected, anything out of the ordinary will be stressful. And then what this statement means is that you should be as strong as to not be strongly affected by these things, by these negative things that are associated with getting education, going to school. Your immune system must be strong to not be affected strongly by stress and lack of sleep. Your mind must be strong. Your nervous system must be strong to not break under these conditions. You just must be very resilient, because the next day you need to go and perform. Another thing, you need to have an ability to grasp new complex concepts quickly and be able to turn them into an active knowledge database. I can show you any theorem right now on the screen, and you may register it, you may even understand it, but it will not become your active knowledge. To turn new concepts into active knowledge, you need to invest work, physical meaning even if it's some interactions between your molecules in the brain, physical work in joules. units of energy you need to invest into converting new impression, new knowledge into the completely assimilated knowledge database. This is an energy costly process. So these four things are what you will inevitably encounter as a student receiving some robust education. Is this good? I don't know. Of course, educational process, again, it simulates some rather extreme scenario, but many people go through that and succeed. So it's not crushing for a human for sure, but it's still challenging. For a healthy human, it's totally fine to undergo this occasionally. When we think about intellectual development, is it similar? For sure. Probably throughout your life, again, you will be facing the need to learn rapidly, to learn to solve some problems rapidly, to learn new skills rapidly, rather infrequently, because after you receive education you no longer need to work on diverse spectrum of tasks. You likely will be in some routine. For most people, you will be occasionally learning some advancements that are necessary for your work, for your profession. Maybe you will receive a diploma to receive different qualification, and then you will be mostly dealing with day-to-day challenges. But regardless of that, you will likely be inclined to stimulate your brain in the way that you are accustomed to. So if you were in school for most of your young years and you are accustomed to getting challenged mentally, then you will likely be pursuing that. And in general, I think that intellectual development is an essential part of our life. We need to always exercise our senses, our imagination, our creativity, our analytical thinking skills, broaden our knowledge, because the moment we stop developing, we start degrading. There is no stable point there. And for humans, it's a vital, it's a species defining function. Our intellect is our species defining feature. So I find it to be very important to develop intellectually throughout the entire life. Maybe not prioritize it over anything else, but keep it in its own domain and do some exercises to keep it going. So when I asked participants to fill out the sections related to school and education and intellectual development, I gave them the following guidelines: how to think about those questions when we wanted to look into how their lifestyle and diet was influencing those areas of life. These are the instructions that I copied directly from the survey spreadsheet. These are the instructions. For school and education, I asked participants to think whether your education was challenged by your diet, either due to low energy or brain fog or other issues, or due to having no time to organize your diet while managing homeworks and proper rest, or whether your school life improved on a given diet due to better health, energy, and cognitive abilities. So we're looking at both biochemical effects of our lifestyle and then time constraints, because, for example, you need to eat, you need to sleep. If your food preparation, for example, takes million units of time, then you will be sleep deprived. This is a bad scenario. This should not happen. Or because of school, you need to squeeze a lot of activities in per unit time. Then you also need to get good sleep. So you're going to make worse dietary choices also. This can be also a contributing factor there. And now let's read the instructions for intellectual development part. Think about the patterns of your intellectual development relatively to the diets. Did you start pursuing less challenging, instant gratification tasks while avoiding more complex and multifaceted tasks while on a given diet? This again, relatively to the baseline. You have certain genetic, epigenetic, and then acquired preferred level of intellectual activity. If that changed, we need to look into that. Or did you start craving more intellectual stimuli? Did your problem solving skills improve or become degenerate on a given diet? Again, we're taking tasks at work. You used to be able to perform them very easily. And then the same level of activities on a given diet, like let's say after several years of following some dysfunctional lifestyle, starts being so hard. You just cannot keep up with that load. Was your diet allowing you to spare time and energy for engaging in creative and challenging tasks? This is also when you're fatigued, you're going to look at that. I don't know, like Sudoku game. Let's take Sudoku game, okay? You look at this Sudoku and you're like, I'm not gonna touch it. I'll better just scroll my phone. I'm out of mental powers. This is the example. This is the illustration of this. And now let's look at the data. We'll start with school because school was, again, not every participant was in school for certain periods of their life related relatively to veganism. So here we have plot school and education versus diet and lifestyle. Y-axis is number of participants, total was 24. One participant didn't respond to this midterm vegan phase. Then on the x-axis, we have individual stages, individual timeline of veganism. Before vegan, early vegan, midterm vegan, end stage vegan, and ex-vegan. And then color coded, we have, if it's not the first video you're watching from the series, we have yellow and green are positive influences of diet and lifestyle on certain area of life. And blue and red are negative influences of diet and lifestyle on certain area of life, in this case school and education. I also made sure that people who did not have school at that time had some option to choose. We see that it's dark gray, and we see if we glance at the plot quickly that about 50% on average of people did not have school at the time, relevant for this timeline. And then pale gray corresponds to no influence. So diet and lifestyle did not play any role in defining the experiences with school and education. Green corresponds to diet, making school and education easier. Yellow corresponds to diet or veganism, enabled school and education for participants. Then blue corresponds to diet, made school and education harder. And red corresponds to diet, prevented people from going to school and receiving education. So this is a hard stop here. And let's now look at the data. You can pause and look through the graph in your own pace. So if we look at the before vegan phase, we see that for two people, diet made it harder for them to pursue education. And this is actually the stage where most people were receiving education, which is not surprising. They were going to school back in the day before they were vegan. And here we see that for two people, diet made it harder. I checked who those people were. One person was on food pyramid diet, one person was on standard American diet. And the person actually who was on standard American diet was the one who reported that switching to veganism improved their experience with school and education. Here it is. I put the part from the table. We see that diet made it easier, and then diet enabled it for them to go to school towards midterm veganism. So we see that there was this improvement for a person who used to be on a standard American diet before they committed to veganism. For other people, however, who went to school, 50% of people experienced difficulties with going to school after switching to veganism. And this trend kept going and kept increasing. Of course, we had some fraction of participants who finished school, who were no longer receiving any formal education. So this data is pushed by the fraction of people who graduated. But we see that the fraction of people who experienced difficulties with education was increasing throughout veganism. And here we see one person even reported that that prevented them from going to school and as end-stage vegans. Then the positive trend here is that for people who experienced issues with school and education, and for whom school and education were relevant at the time, we see that quitting veganism made it easier to receive education and go to school. So if we were to summarize this plot, we'll see that for those seeking education, veganism was making it progressively more difficult with time. Quitting veganism facilitated educational process for participants. If I was to think about some examples from real life who did not obviously participate in the study, I had experiences observing vegans, long-term vegans in school. And it was very notable change, notable difference in attitude, in problem solving, in general level of energy, and certain behavioral patterns. I can surely note that this was the case, that it was making change. It was making certain impact on them. And then I also have one pretty bad story. I don't remember if I talked about it somewhere. But I communicated with a person who had to even skip the whole year of school because of the consequences of veganism. Very young person. Very sad thing. I think they were following more Dr. Morse's advice. You know, Jeanette D'Onofrio, Dr. Morse, they are against taking B12, and so it was a result of their legacy. So now let's move on to intellectual development. Intellectual development obviously was a more all encompassing thing, and all participants could give some feedback on this area of life. So again, number of participants, same color scheme here, except for again people, all people in some way were influenced by intellectual development or engaging in intellectual development activities. So if we are looking at this plot, we see a super devastating trend that for overwhelming amount of people, intellectual development was almost completely impossible towards the end stage veganism. We see that veganism in general was affecting more and more participants' intellectual development towards the end stage. Intellectually, we can say incapacitating over 1/3 of respondents shortly before quitting. This is a super scary trend. And then if we focus only on these two bars, end stage veganism and ex veganism, we'll see that quitting veganism allowed people to become more capable of intellectual work. So respondents who suffered negative consequences of veganism in terms of their intellectual development domain, they flipped, fortunately, experiencing that their new diet with introduction of animal products either enabled their development, which was a pretty good chunk of people as well, and for others that made them more capable of intellectual work. This is a very positive switch. If we zoom in on some smaller trends, we can see that going vegan, what happened when people went vegan? We see that actually for 4 people, the impediment in their intellectual development abilities started as early as just starting to be vegan. This is an interesting one. It's unlikely that certain biochemical outcomes of veganism would manifest as early as just starting to be vegan. Maybe it was time constraint. What was it? I'm not really sure. Probably could verify that using other data. Then we see that right away that the going vegan made a lot of people less capable. And then we see that for 2 people, going vegan enabled their intellectual development. And then also we see that for 3 people, going vegan made them more capable of intellectual work. And this can be also due to cleaning up their diet. It could be perhaps due to having more energy right away. Again, we all know about the magical properties of elimination diets. We all know about how good it feels when you switch from processed food diet. Maybe not all of us know. I mean, I don't know. I was pretty much in the whole food diet, but I mean, for me, it was again quitting grains was the revolutionary act. Quitting certain groups of food, maybe even dairy or something for some people, could give very positive outcome. Then also pursuing new horizons in terms of what to study, what direction to develop in. This can also be some inspirational factor. Then again, as we discussed in other chapters, just developing sense of purpose, developing sense of meaning in life, some belonging also can release a lot of energy and make person more capable of doing stuff, inspired to do stuff. But this probably was not necessarily related to that. If you have something to say about this data, if you participate in the study, please write down in the comments. Then looking at this end stage veganism data for intellectual development made me want to go slightly out of my way, go slightly outside of the flow of this presentation, outside of the flow of the survey, and actually try to correlate this data with symptoms that people developed towards end stage veganism. Because, as you know, if you're following this series, we're going to look into the health manifestations of veganism, quitting veganism later in the series. But I decided for this graph, I decided to look into certain like little trends. So on this plot, I decided to see if there was correlation between intellectual development and health symptoms, such as difficulty learning, short-term memory issues, and fatigue. Because again, this was an overwhelming trend. So were these symptoms. So this is a spoiler. The group of symptoms belonging to the cognitive decline was one of the most pronounced. Other trends, I'm not gonna spoil you yet. So we're looking at the end stage of veganism here. I plotted the percent of participants who reported that veganism had no influence on their intellectual development, and percent participants who reported either of those symptoms. So basically, I took the group, for example, this like red group that prevented from development, and I saw what percent of people reported which symptoms there. So percent is taken not relatively to all 24 participants, but relatively to the percent of respondents to each of these options. No influence, made them less capable, prevent them from development. Okay, we got this, right? Percent participants is taken relatively to the group, this group, each of these groups. So we see that people for whom veganism had no influence on their intellectual development, they did not report having difficulty learning. They did not have this symptom, but they still, 30% of them experienced short-term memory issues and fatigue. Majority of them experienced fatigue. Then, when we look at the group for whom veganism made them less capable of intellectual development, we see that close to 50% of the respondents reported difficulty learning. Then, higher fraction of people reported short-term memory issues, 60%, and then fatigue was reported by 80% of the participants who felt less capable intellectual development. And then when we look at the group of people for whom veganism prevented them from development, we see that they were more strongly affected by the cognitive decline due to veganism. We see difficulty learning and short-term memory issues are at record high among this data. We see that it's probably 85% of participants reported that, and then fatigue was observed in 75% of participants. Yes, this data is taken across pretty small group of people, but this, I think, is a pretty solid data that shows us that difficulties with intellectual development were strongly associated with worsened memory and cognitive abilities, as well as fatigue also contributed there. So yeah, this was likely, or very highly likely, a biochemical damage that led to this data. It was not having time to perform certain sophisticated readings, let's say. It was biochemistry that got affected. And this is what this data shows. And in the next video, we're going to look into how physical performance of our participants changed throughout their veganism. And I'll see you then. Please subscribe to the channel and like this video.